Good evening and welcome to The Breakdown, brought to you by The Lincoln Project. I am Tara Setmayer. This is the Rick Wilson. And tonight we will be talking about a little national security. We haven't talked about that in a while. The Russians are back, if you haven't heard. And we have an unbelievable guest for us tonight, for you guys. Malcolm Nance is with us, so stay tuned for him. But in the meantime, Rick, there's this really awful incident down there in Atlanta. This rise in incidents of just violence against Asian Americans in this country has become really alarming. We still don't know what the motive is yet of the shooter, but the fact that 8 women were killed down there in Atlanta, 6 of whom were of Asian descent, there's just something very alarming about all of this. And flags are flying at half staff on federal grounds in response to that. And we're just going to have a deeper conversation with Malcolm, because he's also a terrorism expert, a little bit about what all this means as well, because it's just been incredibly alarming.
It really has been a marked uptick in the violence that's being perpetrated against Asian Americans, and also in the rhetoric about them. And I think some of it is coincident to a lot of the rhetoric of last year, which we'll talk about a little more later in the show. But it is something that this country has had in its past some pretty virulent moments, both in the 1860s, 70s, and 80s, with Chinese immigrants coming to this country to work in California and on the railroads, et cetera. And immediately in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor with internment. But this is something that it looked like and we felt like we were past in this country. And it's just a reminder that some of these impulses are dormant or latent, and they get stoked and they get stimulated, and we end up with incidents like yesterday. And I'm sorry, I want to jump right in on this, because I, like a lot of people, saw that comment from the sheriff there yesterday that he had a bad
we're gonna get
day.
to that. Yeah,
as you know, I've been pretty lit up on that one today. So
it's remarkable that level of ignorance still exists, and particularly in law enforcement. We're going to get to him in a minute. We want to remind everyone that we want to hear from you, so make sure you send us your tweets at #AskTheBreakdown. As always, we want to hear from you. And if you want to go old school, you can send us a voicemail. There's the number. Leave us a voicemail message, and we might play it during the show. We listen to all the voicemails, by the way. So if you leave them, we'll listen to them. We can't always get them in the show, but we do hear them. So Rick, back to this shooting incident down in Atlanta, in the Atlanta area. Yes. I mean, we all know that Donald Trump's rhetoric behind this was absolutely incredibly inappropriate, racist, bigoted. How many times did he repeat those god-awful terms? China virus, Kung flu. I mean, he did this in a way like he was doing some kind of stand-up routine, and people just clapped along and they were all like, yeah, it was great. I mean, it was very brown shirt, and he did this. I saw a video of him when he was addressing Turning Point USA, which is the Charlie Kirk grift there with the young folks. And they just screamed in excitement when Trump said these things. And I was just horrified by that. And that was a year ago. That was right as all of this was starting with COVID. And here we are, 530,000 dead Americans later. And we see this rise in violence against Asian Americans. And Trump even referred to it as China virus the other night when he was on with Marita Bartiromo on Fox News, calling it the China virus again. Let's remind our viewers about some of the uglier parts of this entire episode. Take a look.
A string of deadly shootings at massage parlors in the Atlanta area. could be linked to a wave of attacks against Asian Americans.
Chinese virus.
Kung flu. Kung flu.
The disturbing surge of racist attacks against Asian Americans.
The Chinese flu.
The Chinese virus.
China virus.
Asian hate crimes surged by 150% across 16 cities in 2020.
The China virus. The China flu.
A man spit, not once, but 3 times in the direction of a 25-year-old Asian American woman and her baby, calling them, quote, the Chinese virus.
The Chinese virus.
Rick, that was one of the
Taryn,
Lincoln Project rapid response videos. Go ahead.
And the rapid response guys, when they put this together today, when Kate and Jeff work on this today, this is something that is news that's still rolling out there, but it doesn't get better the more you look at this thing, because it wasn't just Donald Trump. It also became a sort of game that a lot of folks on the right in the right-leaning media, in the Fox cinematic universe, as they call it, started to think it was hilarious. It was always the Kung flu, the Wu flu, all these things, and it wasn't. There's a point where the transgressive nature of it that appealed to them so much slipped over into something in the minds of people who are, and we don't know the whole story of this guy yet, but let me tell you something.
Right.
He didn't pick these people at random. There's an animus there at some level. And if it was about that these women were allegedly sex workers, that isn't something that goes without its own racial overtones, as we know.
Correct.
And it's a whole package of things that we really have to take a harder look at as a country, and we have to focus on, I think, with some greater intensity than we have so far.
Well, the good news is that Joe Biden is president and Kamala Harris is vice president. And they are responding like, leaders do in a crisis. And they've spoken out against this violence. They're going to Atlanta tomorrow. They were supposed to go to tout the Recovery Act bill and the successes of that, and to go on their tour. But they're actually canceling the political event so that they can go and meet with Asian American lawmakers and community leaders in the Atlanta area tomorrow. So I think that's incredibly important, because we would never see that if Donald Trump had been president. It would have been, I can only imagine how much worse it would have been, because he has no concept. These folks have no concept. He is perpetuating this bigotry and this racism. And thank God we have leaders now that aren't going to put up with it. And Democrats actually held their first congressional meeting today on anti-Asian discrimination in Congress, which is the first time we've seen anything like that in 30 years in the Congress. So at least we're seeing some attention being paid to this.
Yeah, I really do think, and look, there's a sort of cliche in American society that Asians are a successful minority in the country, and they've done all this amazing. And when you get an incident like this, you realize that even an affirmative racial trope like that has a damaging character to it. Mm-hmm. And it is something we, again, this kind of thing has, if you want to call it latent, sure. There's a lot of that in this society, but there's been a catalyzing set of events around this, and this did not happen at random, folks.
No, and let's talk about your police captain down there in Cherokee County, because the shooting incident happened in 2 locations. One was in Fulton County, one was in Cherokee County. Fulton is the Atlanta area. Cherokee is a neighboring county. And this guy, Captain Jay Baker, who is the spokesman there, was talking about during a presser about how he had spoken to the interviewers, and the suspect had expressed that he was fed up and was having a bad day. Let's listen to him in his own words.
He claims that these, and as the chief said, this is still early, but he does claim that it was not racially motivated. He apparently has an issue, what he considers a sex addiction, and sees these locations as something that allows him to go to these places, and it's a temptation for him that he wanted to eliminate. He understood the gravity of it, and he was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope, and yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did.
a really bad day for him.
Really bad day.
He just murdered 8 people. He was just fed up. I mean, this isn't the movie Falling Down. You don't get to just say, I've had it, and go shoot people and kill women. And then you have a police spokesman, a 28-year veteran, is from what I understand, of the force, going out there saying, well, he had a bad day. The defense is he's claiming that they're trying to say, well, he was just repeating what they told him. But I'm sorry. That is entirely too flippant of a response after a mass shooting like this. But Rick, it gets worse. So this wasn't just
gets worse.
And yet this gets worse. This wasn't just this guy. Well, maybe he was just, a little insensitive or naive about this because it doesn't happen in his county or whatever. Except that it was discovered that he put some images on his Facebook page that I think we have a picture of. This was last year. He purchased a shirt that says COVID-19 imported from China, printed CHYNA. And he was bragging about how excited he was about getting his shirt and how more people should get them. So, I mean, this just adds to the level of absolute ignorance that was around this virus that Donald Trump opened the door for with his language. He made it okay to be like this.
Yeah, and look, again, this incident is only one of a wide spectrum of attacks on Asian Americans that have been happening over the last few months. This is a one of terrible, terrible gravity, but it's not the only one. This is not happening simply in a vacuum. I don't know what this guy's issues are, but I know the climate he lives in. I know the culture that has fed a lot of this, and a lot of it has come from folks who've decided that. And again, there was a part of Trump, he thought it was sort of like telling a dirty joke. It's sort of like a kid telling a fart joke, China virus. He thought it was funny in some like Trumpian way, but that stuff slips out into the culture, and it gets out there into the world. And this kind of thing, yes, this is a horrific outlier, but it's not okay to punch an 80-year-old Asian woman in the face, as happened yesterday in Washington State. It's not okay. And this has gone on, I think, far too far. And we have to call it out, and we have to face it as a country.
You know what else is not okay, Rick? It's not okay when you're a member of Congress in a hearing about the rise in Asian American violence to say what Congressman Chip Roy just said. Listen to this.
I would also suggest that the victims of cartels moving illegal aliens deserve justice. The American citizens in South Texas that are getting absolutely decimated by what's happening at our southern border deserve justice. The victims of rioting and looting in the streets last week, businesses closed, burned last summer, deserve justice. We believe in justice. There's old sayings in Texas about, find all the rope in Texas and get a tall oak tree. We take justice very seriously, and we ought to do that. Whether talking about China, the Chi-Coms, the Chinese Communist Party, whatever phrasing we want to use, and if some people are saying, hey, we think those guys are the bad guys, for whatever reason. And let me just state clearly, I do. I think the Chinese Communist Party running the country of China, I think they're the bad guys.
Okay. First of all, this guy, we're glorifying lynching now? You're actually repeating a phrase like find all the rope in Texas and a tall tree? This is fucking 2021. And this guy is out here glorifying lynchings and using that as an example of justice? Let me tell you something right now. Lynching is one of the greatest moral stains on this country. It was used as a domestic terrorism weapon that terrorized Black folks in this country for 100 years. You have got to be kidding me. Lynching is an example of justice? No, lynching is an example of terrorism against an entire group of people in this country for decades. There is a memorial down in Montgomery, Alabama.
Yes, there is.
The lynching memorial that I had an opportunity to visit last year because my good friend Stephen Reed is the mayor there. And it is one of the most heart-wrenching, emotional experiences that I've ever had at a memorial. I think the other one was the Holocaust Museum in Israel. People, every American, I guess every American in the South and elected officials should have to go and face the horrors of what lynching did to Black Americans in this country and what that really meant. So shame on you, Congressman Chip Roy, for making such an ignorant comparison, thinking that that's justice. Shame on him for that. That is, I almost fell over when I saw that. Never mind the rant about the Chinese communists and stuff. Yes, the communist Chinese and the government is a problem. That has nothing to do with what's going on right now. What is he doing? Juxtaposing these two issues. One has absolutely nothing to do with the other.
Chip Roy is the Louis Gohmert of Jim Jordan's. He is not a super bright guy, but it didn't take a genius not to know or to know that you don't go out and make lynching jokes in this country. You just don't, because they're not funny. Lynching is you're right. It was a terrorist means of trying to control the African American population and intimidate them from seeking their rights in this country.
That's right.
And in every southern and a lot of Midwestern states, there were thousands and thousands of African Americans, primarily men, but women also, who were lynched and murdered in that period. You just don't make jokes about it. And who is he proposing to lynch exactly? This is not. I mean, I didn't expect any kind of intellectual or moral clarity from the guy, but it's an embarrassment. It also is a sign, by the way, folks, that Kevin McCarthy has no control over his caucus.
Clearly.
And if in the oldest, John Boehner would have dragged Chip Roy out of that room by the ear and kicked his ass. Even Newt Gingrich would have dragged him out of there. This is not the era of a Republican Party that even wonders, like, oh, should we not say something like that? Should we not make lynching jokes? But you think about it, and he was also playing this game of moral equivalence and pretending in the fantasy world of the alternate universe that Trump and today's GOP supporters live in, that he said, the people on the southern border of Texas are being decimated. First off, misuse of the word, of course, because he's an illiterate. But he's trying to compare the imaginary Antifa attacks and burning down cities and the decimate on some. This is just to feed the hamster wheel of fundraising and propaganda and alternate reality news services. Because I guarantee you, if we were to watch Fox tonight, you would see Chip Roy portrayed as a hero.
Oh, yeah.
He would be standing up to politically correct cancel culture or what have you. So
You're exactly right. Meanwhile, the Asian Pacific Advocacy Organization, Stop AAPI Hate, they've reported that there's been 3,700 cases of hate incidents against people of Asian descent. And out of those, 35% occurred at Asian-owned businesses. And then we had another analysis that found 150% increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans in 16 of America's largest cities. And the largest increases in New York and Los Angeles. We have a recap, actually, of this. Let's take a look.
Some tragic news, the deadly shootings in Atlanta, killing at least 8 people.
It is impossible to ignore that these killings happened at Asian businesses like this one directly behind me in Atlanta, and that most of the victims were Asian women.
Domestic terrorism is on the rise across the country.
FBI agents are calling for a federal law against domestic terrorism.
In the first 3 quarters of this year, we've had more domestic terrorism arrests than the prior year.
The president's words come after the World Health Organization today declared the coronavirus a global pandemic.
We're not happy about China, I will tell you that. The ink wasn't dry on a great trade deal, and all of a sudden, the plague comes in from China. We're not happy about it.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus?
That name gets further and further away from China, as opposed to calling it the Chinese virus. We must hold accountable the nation which unleashed this plague onto the world.
Attacks against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are on the rise nationwide.
The racism that our community is encountering, it's been unbearable.
This is Donald Trump from last night.
Guys, I call it the China virus, COVID.
That breaking news comes from Atlanta. 8 people are dead after shootings at 3 massage parlors.
Yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did.
I couldn't believe that a police captain was recounting the bad day that the killer had.
I think there's no question that some of the damaging rhetoric that we saw during the prior administration, blaming, calling COVID, the Wuhan virus or other things.
But I do want to say to our Asian American community that we stand with you and understand.
President Joe Biden issuing a proclamation for flags to be lowered to half-staff in honor of the spa shooting victims.
Yeah. I think this is something that, as a country, you're right, Rick, that we're going to have to grapple with. And the importance of the juxtaposition of this now with the other instances of domestic terrorism, the rise in this that we've seen. I mean, we're hearing this from so many national security experts that these types of extremist acts, this is a problem in this country. The Homeland Security Secretary, the new one, Mayorkas, he just briefed the House committee on this week. He said, domestic extremism, quote, poses the most lethal and persistent terrorism-related threat to the homeland today. And I think that our next guest has a lot to say about that. But before we bring him in, finish your thought, Rick.
I was just saying, we have hesitated to do domestic terrorism enforcement in this country in some meaningful ways in the last couple of years. But the people that invaded our capital sought to overthrow our government that day. What do you call that? It's not just getting rowdy. It's not just having a few beers and throwing a few bottles in the street. They sought to overthrow our government. It was a terrorist attack. There are people who are engaged in this country. The folks that tried to kidnap and murder Gretchen Whitmer, that was a terrorist cell. If those guys were driving a Toyota Hilux and wearing black tracksuits in Syria, we would have hit them with a fucking hellfire. This is something we've got to face now, and we've got to engage on it, because you can't have an asymmetric response to a threat that is working to be asymmetrical on its own. They are out there doing things they know are hard to enforce against. So we need to really work the problem. Anyway,
that's right. Well,
I'm no expert.
No, what do you know, Rick Wilson? Let's bring a real expert in on this. Our guest tonight is Malcolm Nance. He is the executive director of the Terror Asymmetrics Project on Strategy, Tactics, and Radical Ideologies. He was a career counterterrorism and intelligence officer for the U.S. government's Special Operations, Homeland Security, and Intelligence agencies, with over 33 years of experience in combating radical extremism. He spent more than 2 decades on clandestine anti-terrorism and counterterrorism intelligence operations in the Middle East, North Africa, the Balkans, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. In direct support of special operations and intelligence community operations, he is the best-selling author of Defeating ISIS, The Plot to Hack America, The Plot to Destroy Democracy, and most recently, A Plot to Betray America, How Team Trump Embraced Our Enemies, Compromised Our Security, and How We Can Fix It. I'd say Malcolm Nance is more than qualified to have this discussion with us tonight. Malcolm, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tara. Hi,
hey, man. Good to see you.
Yeah.
So, Malcolm, I don't even know how you still have the energy to write books after all the amazing things you've done and the eventful life you've led. It's really extraordinary. So when you look
I'd hate
at
to be
that,
the one to tell you, Tara, I have a new book coming out, and it's on this subject. I started it last August.
wow.
And I can tell you what the title is. You know what the title is?
I
They want to
suspect it starts
kill
with the plot.
Americans.
Yeah.
No, they want to kill
Oh.
Americans.
Who is the they?
They are, actually the subtitle is the armed malicious, fanatical terrorist and deranged ideology of the coming Trump insurgency. And it's other Americans who want to kill Americans. And they have been proving this over and over again. I was almost finished the book in December. And I said, let's see what happens before the inauguration.
How about that?
There we are.
And there's your conclusion, right? Leading up to probably a sequel, because I suspect that this is not over, right?
No.
Which leads me to my first question. You see what happened down there in Atlanta. We don't quite know what the motive was yet, but it's just another layer of this homegrown racist extremist violence that we've seen happening. So when you look at these things, and when you looked at January 6th, as you were writing this book, what do you think has been the common denominator here for this level of radicalization?
You know, I'm glad you asked me that question, because today I was finishing off there. You know, this book started out as 7 chapters. I'm on chapter 13 now, and I have been trying to finish it. But I had to go back over the history section today, because I had written extensively about anti-Asian hate crimes and anti-Asian sentiment in the United States, starting in, with the California gold rush. And interestingly enough, my thesis is pretty simple. And this is where I'm sure it will become, Glenn Greenwald will write articles about me. Tucker Carlson will put me in the A block of Fox News again. And the thesis is quite simple. The thesis is quite simple. The fundamental motivator for violence in the United States since its founding, and it's almost a building block of how America became the nation it was, is racism. Now, I know that sounds shocking, but it really absolutely is. When I go through the entire arc of what happened once, the initial colonies land in the United States, when the Pilgrims settle, Plymouth Rock, and you go on through the rise of the Americas and the pressing of the colonies outwards, everything comes down to wanting to commit violence against people of other races, right up until today. I mean, I was just refining a section on the Scalp Act of 1747, where the whole purpose of killing Indians wasn't just ethnic cleansing. It had to be ethnic cleansing with proof that you actually killed Indians. And if you did that, it was more cost effective to pay you $150 equivalent in today's dollars to actually bring the entire upper head of an Indian in, or $130 if it was a woman, than it would be to actually cut deals and be at peace with the Indians. From the very start of this nation, our entire friction with every society and every immigrant group that we bring in, right, was racism. And, we even had some touches of it with some of the anti-immigrant groups, like the Know Nothings, who in fact got put out of business in 1855, even though they had 100 members of the House of Representatives. They got put out of business because the South was far more focused on Black racism and keeping the establishment of slavery than it was with white immigrants coming from Europe. So it was like a flash in the pan and went away so that they could get down to civil war. And every ethnic group that has come to this country has met with a wall of racism. And now I'm starting to see the cycles return through history. And that was supposed to have been like a 5,000 word chapter, right? Yeah, 13,000 words later, I actually have to cut out 9,000 words, because racism is such a fundamental component of everything that we have been, and everything that these people are, and showing right up to this week where you have the police chief essentially calling, apologizing for the murderer by using his words, right? His words to characterize what his murder was, and absolving himself from any racism.
It's unspeakable. It really is. And you have these other terrorists, these domestic terrorist groups, and I'm going to call them that. These extremist militia groups, the Proud Boys. A couple of the leaders were arrested in 4 states that were connected to the Capitol riot on the 6th. So I'm glad to see that their asses are being brought to justice. I think that's 13 of them now that have been identified in court papers as members of the Proud Boys. The stand back and stand by. The good people, we love you, right, that Donald Trump said. Yeah, those bastards. But then you also have these other groups. You have like the Boogaloo Boys, the Oath Keepers, these 3%ers. There's these other militia groups, these extremist groups that are out there. And, I hate to give them attention, but I also think people need to know that this is going on. Like, what's important for the American people to know about these groups and how they're all connected?
Well, you do have to give them attention, because we now need to understand fundamentally as a nation. And, again, I never wanted to write another book about Donald Trump. I swear to God, I didn't want to write anything else about him. And then after the last summer, escape. I know, right?
Ask Rick.
But after last summer, I started seeing this trend in what we had called in 2018, just as far back as 2018, the alt-right. Okay? At the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, which had brought in all of these disparate groups, from white supremacist, neo-heritage white supremacists like the Ku Klux Klan and the Southern heritage types. Right. And then you have the these guys who call themselves the alt-right, who would actually form the basis of the Boogaloo Boys, the really young guys in polo shirts. And then you had the Proud Boys, and then traditional militias who were there saying that they were there to keep the peace. But all of these groups had come together in Charlottesville as the alt-right. Interesting thing occurred after we had given them a period of national shaming, including attacking Donald Trump. Do you recall even hearing about the alt-right as an organizational body in 2019? For the most part, they sort of disappeared from that appellation. And what happened was they broke into their fundamental groups again. And then 3 groups rose to prominence that really weren't there before. Because what they did was the younger men in these groups moved out into other groups. The militias are always there. They have always been here. I live near a place where the Shays Rebellion took place in 1787, right? These militias have always been around. But then you had the Proud Boys, came up with Gavin McInnes as a street brawling gang whose sole function was to get physical and punch out liberals wherever they found them. You had that famous video punch up in New York City where that took place. But that gave a basis to all these guys around the country to say, you can form your own Proud Boys too. You can take it to the liberals. And then you had the Boogaloo Boys, which was essentially, and I'm going to be quite honest, the only way I can figure these guys out, because they all appear to be between like 17 and 25, with a few older leaders. These are guys who were playing Call of Duty one day and then decided to live action role play by going and buying a real AK-47 and body armor and meeting like-minded young guys on the street to do with what they called accelerationism, which was to tear down the government and the establishment. But to tear down the government and the establishment to create a white nationalist society. That's the part that they don't tell you. Yeah. Right. So all of these groups leading into 2020, we saw them all come out in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement. But a very interesting thing occurred. By July, it became clear that these groups were no longer individual groups. They had one common denominator. They were becoming the unofficial paramilitary of the Trump campaign leading into the 2020 election. So they actually lost their identity and they all put on red hats. And at that point, I thought, oh, geez, I got to write another book. You know, these guys are going to be. And when I made my proposals to the publishers, it was as simple as this. They were like, "Oh, when this election's over and Biden wins, we're going to be done with this." And I said, "I got some bad news for you." And I actually told Bill Maher. I told Bill Maher this on November 6th, 3 days after the election. I said this thing. I have some doom and gloom for you, because he was doing kumbaya. I said, what you're going to see now is Trump has lost. These people are going to become an insurgency. They are going to organize both politically and paramilitarily, and Trump will be giving them cues, and they will be taking action from those cues. Fast forward to January 6th. And what you saw was those individuals without weapons that day. Although we've identified people carrying weapons on the Capitol. We've actually identified the actual pistols. But these people, these now Trump, what I call Titus, right? We are entering in a phase of American history I call the Trump insurgency in the United States. He has now started to find his footing after he has lost Twitter and Parler and all these other platforms. He now understands the power of his silence. And when he comes out and makes a political statement, it gives rise and fuel to all of these paramilitary subordinates who are waiting for some indication of where he wants them to act. And let me tell you, I monitor these guys every day on Telegram, Parler, Twitter, wherever, the few that are still on Twitter, and a lot of gun forums where they've broken out into the mainstream. And the big question that goes on amongst them is this: what's it going to take to break us? What is it that what's our breaking point? They're constantly asking that because many of them really want to play with those guns. And so it really is up to Donald Trump. And I suspect he understands he has more power than he thinks with these Fox News interviews and his interviews for these books, because then he can hone his message and speak to his followers with a giant sound-powered megaphone. No more dog whistles about what
that
exactly.
That is terrifying. That is a terrifying prospect. Terrifying. Rick, I know you have a question about the efforts that Malcolm just referenced in there, identifying folks, what they're doing.
There is, Malcolm, I think you're exactly right. There is a constant sort of online discussion among these folks of where's our go day, where's our moment, where's that day where it crosses the line, and we go to war. And I know that with a lot of them, there's an important sense of swagger. I read a lot of the same kind of like stuff to keep abreast of like who's coming to threaten us next.
Right.
And a lot of them basically are saying, well, the Capitol thing, that was a dry run. It wasn't meant to be the big day. It wasn't meant to be the boogaloo. It wasn't meant to be. And they operate under the same sort of terrorist theory that ISIS and Al Qaeda in Iraq and the Taliban, that threats, intimidation, selected killing at the time when the time comes will be sufficient to collapse the government. And look, folks, historically, it's not a terrible bet if you're on their side. I mean, governments have collapsed for less. If we had that day, if the mob had found Pelosi and killed her, or if the mob had found Pence and killed him, this government would have collapsed. We would not have had a transition of power. And it's important to understand just how close we got that day, because it was minutes, not hours.
I'm going to tell you a terrifying fact that most observers missed about the Capitol attack, because the Capitol attack is one of the last things I've written about. Here's what would have happened that day on January 6th, had the members of Congress been incapacitated, had Mike Pence been incapacitated or incommunicado, Nancy Pelosi or this President of the Senate pro tem, if those three individuals had been either in communication or incapacitated, whether they had thrown gas, whether there were beatings, whether there was massive fighting, are you aware that we would have lost 2/3 of the government? There would have been no vice president of the United States. where if let's say that Mike Pence had been seriously injured, right? Because his Secret Service detail would have opened fire on those civilians. They would have just wailed through them, right? We would have had dozens and dozens killed. But he was there with his family. He could have been incapacitated. The president didn't have to appoint a new vice president right away. If Nancy Pelosi had been injured or incapacitated, the Speaker of the House is number 3 in the line of succession. So then there's the president of the Senate pro tem. All of these people were in the same room. We would have essentially been left that evening with a monarchy, with Donald Trump, the only existing member of the United States senior government. Give that a minute's thought.
It is truly horrifying.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and he wouldn't have had to have appointed anybody. He would have said, I'm just going to run the government until such time as Congress is reconvened and we can choose a new vice president or a new Speaker of the House.
I can't, Malcolm, please.
Mind-blowing.
We had enough nightmares.
Minutes, not hours.
God. I'm telling you.
It's a very close run thing, as they say.
Much closer than you think.
You're 100% right, which is why I've said this. I know others have. There needs to be a 9/11 style commission to investigate how serious that incident on January 6th was, how close we actually came to a scenario that you just outlined, how close we came to the Secret Service having to shoot civilians to protect the vice president, for God's sakes, how close, how much Donald Trump played a role in keeping the National Guard from doing its job and protecting the Capitol. How much he was sitting back and enjoying, delighted to see what was going on because those were his people, the sickness behind that. I mean, I just don't know that the American people truly appreciate the severity of what happened on that day because they keep trying to we want to move past it. And you've got these members of Congress that are trying to act like that it was just another day. People were just having a bad day, I guess. They were patriots. These were, Ron Johnson. I wasn't afraid of these people. These are Americans. These are patriotic folks. It's those BLM people we should be afraid of. I mean, it's just hard to fathom that this is where we are. And we have a whole party of Republicans now that seem to be apologists for this behavior. I just never thought we would see this not at this level. It's unbelievable. But we're going to pivot to Russia.
If a group of BLM activists had plotted to kidnap and murder a governor, it would be nonstop hearings until the sun cooled.
Of course.
And the universe died. They would have had that as the centerpiece of the entire election. And they would have never heard the end of it. But instead,
or if they chanted hang Mike Pence.
Yeah.
Chanted hang the vice president.
Branch
Could you imagine?
Of Al-Qaeda up there trying to pull this thing off. And it's just an amazing moment.
I was excoriated on the 7th of January when I went on air. And I said, look, I'm going to give this to you straight from an intelligence perspective. The United States government disarmed itself, the entire national security apparatus, under the premise that these people were white, Trump supporters, and were using the name Patriot. Therefore, they can't do anything bad, and you won't use the system's resources and defenses, that you normally would, simply because they were white Trump supporters. And so the entire system collapsed. And when I wrote my Washington Post op-ed a week later, I said, they use the color of their skin as the camouflage to approach their enemies and kill them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Very, very good point. Well, who hasn't really camouflaged their efforts? That's Russia. The Office of National Intelligence. Yeah, those guys put out a report this week. Because this is something that Americans should not forget either. The Russians have been meddling in our elections for many years. They did it in 2016 pretty blatantly, and they did do it again in 2020, but in a different way than they did. They learned a little bit from 2016. And one of the most obvious catalysts who was doing their work was someone rather close to the President of the United States. I wonder who that was. We have a recap, actually. Let's take a look.
We have brand new revelations tonight about what Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin were up to when it came to trying to ensure the 2020 election ended with the defeat of Joe Biden and the re-election of Donald Trump.
Russian President Vladimir Putin knew of and likely directed a Russian effort to manipulate the 2020 U.S. presidential campaign to benefit former President Donald Trump with misleading or unsubstantiated allegations against challenger Joe Biden.
Undermining public confidence in the electoral process and exacerbating socio-political divisions in the United States.
Quote, a key element of Moscow's strategy this election cycle was its use of people linked to Russian intelligence to launder influence narratives.
They were doing it through proxies who they say met with and provided materials to people in the Trump orbit.
Andre Derkach allegedly worked with Mr. Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to spread false corruption allegations regarding President Biden's family in Ukraine.
Let's just say what Rudy Giuliani is. He's a treasonous traitor. I mean, he's also a clown, but he's a treasonous traitor clown.
Konstantin Kilimnik, also named in the report, was a close associate of Paul Manafort, Mr. Trump's former campaign chairman.
Quote, Manafort lied consistently during these interviews about one issue in particular, his interactions with Kilimnik.
The director, Ratcliffe, did this. The National Security Advisor, Mr. O'Brien, did this. Secretary Pompeo did this. Bill Barr, the Attorney General, did this. They all talked about how it was China much greater than Russia. That was a lie.
The Biden administration will respond, and they will respond quickly.
They're going to pay a price, as the president conveyed.
The conversation started off, I said, I know you and you know me. If I establish this occurred, then be prepared.
I mean, it's like the greatest hits. We forgot all about all of that, for God's sakes. But this is, I just can't believe how for years and years people just kind of glossed over this. Could you imagine if Barack Obama had these kinds of interactions, comments, associates involved with one of our sworn global enemies? What? This wouldn't just be par for the course. They would have tried him for treason, for God's sakes. Malcolm, can you please explain why the American people should care?
Well, first, let me say I had the honor of being on air next to Claire McCaskill when she called them treasonous traitor clowns. it was all I could do, not to completely explode in laughter on air. I was so glad the camera was off me because we were dying over that. Because like I said, that pretty much sums it up. They can end the segment now. But here's what's going on. Look, we are now understanding the true depth of the Republican outrage machine. They can turn on for 4 years the entire screaming of Benghazi, 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 the deaths of 4 U.S. government members from a terrorist attack, and still gloss over the near 600,000 deaths of U.S. people in a global pandemic. So they can take the entire outrage of them essentially carrying out the water for a foreign intelligence agency being 1 degree of separation from Vladimir Putin, who in this instance was running a human intelligence operation with Andrei Derkach and passing information that Putin and his staff themselves had helped draft up directly from Putin to Derkach to Rudy Giuliani. And that story was the Hunter Biden laptop story.
That's right.
It's absolutely amazing. But the U.S. intelligence community came out and decisively said Russia was taking active influence operations. And it's changed because in 2016, it was direct information producing meta-narratives and themes, Russia great, Hillary bad and evil, and magnifying Donald Trump. The Russians didn't have to do that anymore. Donald Trump's data team and Donald Trump himself took over that job. And all the Russians had to do was amplify information, but they found that they didn't even have to do that because the Trump campaign was so blatant about it that they would take anything that Russia might might slightly infer and turn it into this massive issue. So they shifted to human intelligence, which was actually drafting crafted disinformation that Vladimir Putin, by the way, was a Russian human intelligence KGB officer. I went to his old office in Dresden when he was a baby spy, right? And he liked going out and flipping people. And when the Soviet Union collapsed and East Germany collapsed, the first thing he did was he went and got the master book of all the spies that the KGB had flipped in East Germany while his buddies were all looting the grocery stores. He knew the power of manipulating individuals and blackmailing the hell out of them. So he saw the Trump campaign was so easy, he could do it himself. They're probably laughing in the Spitz, when they're out in the steam bath, laughing at each other about, well, remember that time I made up that Hunter Biden laptop story and I told it to Derkach and Derkach told it to Giuliani, and that held America locked tight for almost a year and caused an impeachment. And there's just not enough vodka. They're all going to have to go to AA when this is done. But that's what happened. Russians having to go to AA, right? So what happened here was Vladimir Putin himself actually crafted this campaign, knowing how simple it would be and giving him the feeling of that heyday back when he was a baby spy and was flipping West Germans and East Germans to do his bidding. And he found that the United States is so vapid, so stupid, and so gullible that he's already convinced 30% of them that there was no Russian scandal and that China was doing everything. And he essentially owns the Republican Party in his pocket. They literally are in his pocket.
Oh my gosh, it's infuriating. It's so infuriating. And we look at this, and again, it's another one of those things that many books with many leather-bound books are going to be written about this. Are going to be written about this very subject. And in 5 or 10 years, we're going to read about the absolute depravity, the duplicitous nature of what a lot of Trump's people were doing. Giuliani, I mean, there are so many through lines from Giuliani to Russian oligarchs and corruption and money and the nonsense about Biden, the whole Ukraine impeachment. I mean, just the American people have no idea how just traitorous that Ukraine incident really was, and what Donald Trump actually did. It's just because it was in a faraway place people can't identify on a map that Americans' eyes kind of glazed over. But that was unbelievable what went on. And yet Republicans, the party of Reagan, and, tear down this wall and being so proud about, fighting the Soviets and communism and all that sanctimony went right out the window when Donald Trump basically betrayed the office of the presidency and our allies and Americans by getting into bed with these people and trying to use the power of the United States to do the bidding of Vladimir Putin. It's outrageous, absolutely outrageous. It's so much. There's so much to talk about with that, especially with Giuliani. My God. But before we let you go tonight, Malcolm, I want to make sure that people know some of the work that you were doing concerning the identifying Capitol rioters. You guys and some of your, other intel experts are using your expertise to lay eyes on some of the videos and the footage that's been out there. And there's just been thousands of man hours of, looking at these videos, trying to identify these bastards. And talk a little bit about what you guys have been doing and how Americans can help if they can.
Okay. I won't say what group that I'm working with, but what myself and a couple of other ex-military people, intelligence people have been doing is there is a way to determine, based on how they act, how they dress, what patches and equipment that they're carrying, to determine a service member or an ex-service member or an active or ex-law enforcement officer. And there really is these cosplay LARP costumes that they wore on the attack on the Capitol that we saw. And, the thing is, I'm a gear guru because, in the first Gulf War, I went into the Gulf War with no gear, and I became like this connoisseur of tactical equipment after that. And I spent $2.5 million outfitting 350 Iraqi and British bodyguards in England. So I constantly have the CEOs of these companies say, look at this new gear that we have. And so I can tell a cheap piece of Chinese fake copy body armor, right, that has just literally been brought out of a store, versus a guy like one that we identified who was a ex-Special Forces soldier. He retired from Special Forces, in fact, who was at the Capitol. And I said, they said, what do you think of this guy? And I go, that guy is wearing a real Cry jumpable plate carrier that has been worn for some time. And that is not a cheap piece of equipment. He had a real $2,000 combat helmet on. So, you see things like that. And then you see everybody else is wearing $43 Chinese skateboard helmets that are copies of those helmets. And you just go, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And many of these guys wear patches of their units, have their name on, and veterans generally don't wear all that cosplay stuff. The full body armor. They may carry a backpack that they wore in Iraq or Afghanistan. And we can tell who they are. They're pretty good. Mm-hmm. Cops tend to wear olive drab and black and dress like the SWAT team or like what they think is a surveillance team from the advertisements for 511 tactical gear, right? So you see all these guys. And there were hundreds upon hundreds of people who carried their body armor, helmets, pepper spray. We identified weapons, including a kid who had to have been 18 or 19 years old. He was not a cop, carrying a SIG P320 pistol with magazines. We caught him on video pulling his vest over it, and all we could see was the butt. And the guy who was leading this group says, well, how do you know it's that pistol? I said, give me a minute. I went down to my weapons locker and brought back this M17, the U.S. Army version of the SIG P320. And I held it up and I said, look at the lines on the magazine. And he goes, oh my God, that's the same gun. So,
and just it's a damn fine pistol. I have two of them.
I was just going to say that SIG P320 is a very nice pistol. And the competition version is even nicer. Go ahead.
Well, these guys, they're like I said, they're, the Boogaloo Boys, many of whom were there, and a lot of these LARPers that were there, are really just Call of Duty players who went and bought guns and body armor and the helmet and go out on weekends and try to pretend like they're Call of Duty. I mean, they graduated from the airsoft BB guns up into real weapons, and now they have an identity by wearing Hawaiian shirts and taking part in sedition. We're going to roll them up.
That's extraordinary. And I kudos to you and your team for using your skill sets to do this work and help our federal law enforcement officers in this effort, because these people need to be brought to justice. And the way to bring them to justice is through getting arrested, going to court, and being convicted, not by calling for people to get all the rope in Texas and a large tree. That's not how we do justice in 2021. Malcolm Nance, we have a couple tweets before we let you go. Do you mind answering a couple of questions? Okay.
Sure.
Let's do our first tweet. Mr. Nance, how do you eradicate the domestic terrorists when you have elected officials like Ron Johnson, Josh Hawley et al., and media like Fox giving them cover? It's Jim Reiser.
Good question, Jim.
Great question.
First, I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about a month ago. It got pretty cut down. I call op-eds work. But my underlying thesis is one of the major counterintelligence, or not counterintelligence, counterinsurgency tools that we use is you have to remove you have to delegitimize the movement of the insurgent themselves. Before I started writing Trump-Russia books, I wrote 6 different books on counterterrorism, including one that's used throughout all law enforcement, the Terrorist Recognition Handbook. And that's on its 4th edition coming out. And one of the things that we found is in all insurgencies, all terrorist groups, they all start with a political grievance that they have to legitimize to a base of the population so that they can have acceptance of their activities. That's phase 1 insurgency. That's where we are right now. So the entire Stop the Steal, Storm the Hill, Fight for Trump was them putting into action their belief that they were popularizing the cause through direct action. The way that you pop that balloon or burst that bubble is you immediately attack the legitimacy of these individuals, the legitimacy of their cause, and then you shame them. And that's what the FBI is doing through law enforcement, right? As you say, you arrest them, you bring them to court, you let them cry in front of court. And you you get people to deny that they were ever part of this. You will have none of these people will go to court and stand up before a U.S. judge and say, I did it, I was there, I wanted to destroy American democracy, I'm a patriot. They all call themselves patriot. That's how they actually identify each other. Everyone else who is not a patriot is a CCP liberal, Chinese Communist Party liberal. That's the term they're using now, right? They all think we're part of the Chinese Communist Party. These people are 50% fantasists who believe that the movie Red Dawn, the one where the Cubans and the Russians invade, they believe that movie was real.
You mean the documentary Red Dawn?
No, Dolph Lundgren wasn't in that.
No,
that was The Expendables. No, the original Red Dawn that had Powers Booth in it, and they were the high school kids in Colorado. And then that's 50% of how they believe, and the other 50% is the modern version of Red Dawn, where they think that it's the Chinese that have invaded the United States. And what you have to do is attack it directly. Say, you don't ever use the word patriot, conservative, Republican. I don't even like using Trumpista. I go right to this: insurrectionist, insurgent, and if you want to, even though it's legally not binding, traitor. And when you constantly call them out and say, you're insurrectionist, you're like ISIS. I had a gentleman from San Diego send me a letter in my crazy file this week, which said, how dare you call us like ISIS and Al-Qaeda? And you can thank Laura Ingraham for that about 10 days ago. She had me on her A block for 5 minutes attacking me.
Of course she did.
These people don't like what we're doing. And that is how you break their legitimacy. You say, well, you're not, you were there to destroy democracy, right? And they say, no, we weren't. And you say, you are cop killers. And that gets them even more angry. And, I like to justify it when I'll end on this point. The first sentence of my new book is very interesting because this is why they went to the victim flipping and saying that, no, it was Antifa that did it. Well, Officer Mike Fanone of DC Police, he was actually being beaten by at least 10 people. They were grabbing on everything that he had. They pulled his radio off, his badge, both magazines of ammunition. They pulled his stun gun off and stung him behind the neck. And they believe he may even have had a minor heart attack during that. But if they were getting to the point where he was losing his energy and they were beating him, someone grabbed the butt of his pistol. And the first words of my book are what he said he heard when he knew that this had gotten out of hand and that they were going to kill him. And the first words of my book are, kill him with his own gun. That's what they shouted to him, to grab his pistol and kill him with his own gun. And it was only because he stumbled backwards and someone who believed in the thin blue line intervened at that point. He put his hand on his gun. But he also knew that if he had drawn with the 15 remaining rounds, every other cop there would have drawn. And there would have been hundreds dead on the western side of the Capitol. So Malcolm, go after these people in their legitimacy.
Yes. I, as the wife of a 20-year veteran of federal law enforcement, hearing you tell that story that way just literally gave me shivers down my spine. Because that could have been my husband. That could have been, so many other people in a situation like that. And I saw the original interview with that officer on CNN. And I remember the first time I heard it, I got that same feeling in the pit of my stomach that my greatest fear, that's something I'd been warning about for a long time, was that we were in a cold civil war and that this cold civil war would eventually turn hot. And it did that day. Good friends. That I can't take credit for it. I heard Carl Bernstein say it, and I've used it ever since, because I couldn't find, I always said it was about like a civil war, but the idea of a cold civil war and then it turning hot is something that I think was a really good descriptor of what's going on right now. And we cannot have this go to the next level where they actually go beyond what happened on January 6th. That's been my fear. And I think that your book, it would probably reinforce that we're, that we've got to do some things to make sure that doesn't happen. Oh my goodness. We have one more tweet for you and then we're going to let you go. Thank you for joining us for so long, Malcolm. We appreciate you spending so much time with us. Is it possible for the U.S. to address domestic terrorism and reduce the likelihood of attacks like what happened in Atlanta while simultaneously staying true to the Constitution and Bill of Rights? This is a good question, Malcolm, because people after 9/11, right, the Patriot Act and some of the civil libertarians in our country were like, whoa, hold on here. We might be taking this a little bit too far where we're sacrificing our rights in the name of security. Do you think that that's something that pendulum could swing the other way again this time in our response to what we're seeing now? How do we balance the two?
I don't think that we're going to have a situation like in the U.S. Civil War where we suspend habeas corpus and, start instituting martial law in large parts of the country. That would require open and large scale rebellion. And that's another thing that I warned on Bill Maher's show. I said, one day, if Trump pushes them enough, those ISIS-like convoys, of the Trump parade, in some areas could arm themselves and declare that they are no longer under the jurisdiction of the federal government. You never know when that happens. And I'm glad that you were telling me that your significant other is a member of law enforcement, because this is fundamentally going to become a law enforcement problem. We do not need to use the National Security Agency. We do not need to go out and start using, giving the FBI expanded rights. The FBI is doing just fine. And one of the technologies which they got a warrant for was to, essentially throw an electronic gate around the Capitol and get warrants for every telephone that was on that day, right? And from that, pinpoint the individuals by their phone number. And then, of course, that allows them under existing laws that we already have. Look, the Department of Homeland Security can seize your laptop, go through your phone at any U.S. border point, right? So don't tell me that the FBI can't go through your phone once they've indicted you. They can. And your phone and your behavior and your Instagram and your Facebook feed are, I've said this many times, are the greatest intelligence assets in the world for hostile intelligence, but they will also indict you. I've seen many, for those of you who don't watch the TV show First 48, you can just go see how many idiots get arrested on the basis of the fact that they had their guns in the cache on Facebook. Right. Same thing with these guys. We do not have to violate the Constitution to rein in the idiots.
Because they're a bunch of collective dumbasses. So thank you for making our jobs easier, right?
Thank God. Thank God. It's the scary ones that scare you.
Oh my gosh.
The smart ones that scare you.
Yeah, Malcolm, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. I encourage our supporters here who watch us to please follow Malcolm. And we have to have you back because the next time you come on, I want you to talk about the best way to survive if you're captured as a prisoner of war, since that is something that you taught. And I could only imagine that the stories behind that are extraordinary. So read Malcolm's books, follow him on Twitter, and make sure you watch him on MSNBC and other places like that. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, one last point on talking about captivity. Seems that it's a fact that when I was teaching at the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape School and running the water board, one of my students was a certain young Lieutenant Greg Kelly, who is now over at Newsmax, a Marine Harrier pilot. And he seems to have very, very stark memories of me on the waterboard. And he would have been right. I was one of the only African Americans at that school shouting at him and waterboarding him. So he really doesn't like me. but we might talk about that next time.
Well, I would suspect that there's a certain amount of gratification at this point now, looking at where he ended
I'm
up.
glad you
At least
reminded
you
me.
got to do that. Malcolm, thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you,
We appreciate
Malcolm.
you. We'll have you back.
Good night, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, see, Rec, I was going to start him in those stories, but we've already gone long tonight anyway, so we'll have to have him back. Could you imagine having drinks and sitting around the fire with Malcolm Nance? He's had an extraordinary career. He's a really amazing guy. So before we end the show tonight, I wanted to remind our viewers of two things. First of all, our call to action tonight is in line with our discussion about the Capitol rioters. Malcolm mentioned how him and his group of intelligence guys have been helping out, but the FBI is still asking for Americans to help out in identifying some of these rioters. They've committed a litany of criminal acts here, and the FBI has already arrested more than 300 of them. And but they put out a video because there's still some more footage that they want people to look at. There's 10 suspects that are seen assaulting federal officers, and they need help identifying them. So please go to this website, watch the videos, and be warned. It can be a little disturbing, but if you think that there's a possibility you might be able to identify one of these people, please do it and contact the FBI if you have any information. So that's our call to action tonight. You can be we have citizen journalists. You can be a citizen investigator, citizen sleuth, and try to help out the feds to try to get these bastards. So the more the merrier in helping do this is good, because we can do that because of modern technology. And also, I wanted to remind folks that the Lincoln Project has been on the ground in Georgia. We've been talking about this a lot because of voter suppression and the bills that are being introduced not only in Georgia, but around the country. And we have been labeling these people who are pushing these bills part of the Jim Crow caucus. Well, we are reminding the folks down there in the capital of Georgia with this Lincoln Project-sponsored billboard truck that has been driving around the Capitol, reminding them, GOP, don't be part of the Jim Crow caucus, because that's what they are right now in support of these bills. And I heard today from one of my very good friends that there are some corporations, large ones down there in Georgia, who are nervous that we are doing this, that we are part of the pressure campaign with the civil rights organizations down there in Georgia. They specifically called to get a message to us to ask us to please don't get them caught up in our public pressure campaign. And I simply told my political friend to relay the message back to these folks. Well, they have a choice. Which side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge are they choosing to be on? There is no lukewarm position here. So if they don't want us to come after them, then they need to come out unequivocally and denounce voter suppression bills and make sure that their PACs do not give any money to any elected officials who do this. So it's very simple. There's only two choices here. There is no in between. You're either pro-democracy or you're not. The end. Yep. So on that note, everyone have a great night. Have a great weekend. Make sure you check out our newsletter, Honestly Abe. If you hadn't signed up for it, sign up for it. Also, be sure to follow us at LPTV, where you can see our clips and our schedules and when we'll be on. And we're going to leave you with a clip from the Lincoln Project podcast. Make sure you listen to that. If you have not signed up for it, you have to re-sign up for it because we relaunched it. So make sure you do that. And we still want to hear your voicemails. So keep sending them to us because we do listen to them. And we also sometimes we play them at the end of the show. And I think we have one tonight where you can hear a mashup of your voices and what you're saying to us. So thank you all for joining us this week. Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
we'll be
everybody.
back on Tuesday.
Hi, this is Mike from Portland.
My name's Sheila from Australia.
My name is Sherry. I live in Georgia.
I am one of your loyal followers from the state of Arkansas. Please don't forget all of the contributions, and I'm making that sarcastically, of Tom Cotton.
I would also like to know what in the hell is going on in Georgia with the election with Trump. I mean, we've got we've got 5 McDonald's in Albany, Georgia. So if he wants to bring his fat ass down here and count the votes himself, have at it.
Sorry, no question, but I am loving this show.
You are a wicked, evil woman.
I just want to say you guys are so awesome. I love to watch your show. Tara, I got one thing to say. You are one beautiful woman.
I hope you don't mind me ringing in from Australia. I really, really want to know why the United States doesn't have a federal election commission that is completely apolitical.
Why are you afraid of Tucker Carlson?
Oh, Tucker Carlson. Yeah, Tucker Carlson. He's a piece of shit.
We love y'all. We thank you for everything that you do.
Thanks for what you do.
I love your show. Bye.
End of messages.
I see that visceral rage in my fellow veterans that I haven't seen in ages. There's this true outrage at the idea that our nation that we fought so hard to defend, that we went overseas and wore a flag proudly on our shoulders as a beacon of hope, has devolved to a point where violence is now a part of the political spectrum.
We still know what records are, right? On the thing you put the needle down on and you play it.
Are you vulnerable to claims you incited a riot? Has the bumbling incompetence of your legal representation left you depressed and adrift in your Palm Beach Xanadu? Hi, I'm Rudy Giuliani of Giuliani, and Known Associates, the insurrection law specialists. And I'm here to tell you we can do a better, if not more entertaining job. Here at Giuliani and Giuliani, we know that when the facts are against you, it's time to let your lawyer become the story. Sure, suggesting your client lost the election and that the FBI should arrest him might make headlines for a day or two, but this zoot suit and his dweeby little partner simply can't provide the lasting front-page legal distraction you need. But we can. Here at Giuliani and Giuliani, we are dripping with proven expertise in insurrection law, television law, Congress law, public speaking, and audience engagement. Look, we know you're getting off the hook here, one way or the other. But don't you want to win in the memorable and institutionally injurious fashion to which you have grown accustomed? And to be blunt, I need this. I may be facing criminal charges of incitement to riot. Your failure to pardon was just the incentive I need to win big on your behalf. But you gotta act now. This is a limited opportunity. My legal credentials could be revoked at any moment. Please call me, day or night, 201-305-9163. Day or night, 201-305-9163. Please.
Giuliani, and known associates, insurrection law specialists.
I thought they must be calling the wrong guy. My dance experience consists of drinking too much at a couple rehearsal dinners. It's all about the wedding performance, baby.
Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Just watching my algorithms get crushed. I guess I did something to piss off the Instagram gods, so hopefully you're seeing this stuff anyway. We'll do what we can. Talk to you soon.